One of the most startling years in the history of the death penalty occurred in the United States in 2024. 50 inmates were sentenced to death, but only half of them actually stepped into the execution chamber. 25 had their execution suspended, while the other 25 faced their inevitable fate across 9 different states. What crimes did they commit to receive the ultimate punishment? In their final moments, what did they say? And when was their last meal before crossing into the unknown? In this video, Criminal Execution takes you deep into the most chilling executions of 2024. The final words of these inmates, remorseful, defiant, or hauntingly silent, their last meals lavish, simple, or outflagging. Fright rejected. But get ready, because you will be startled by the method of execution when we get to Prisoner 18. Never before used one that sparked global controversy. And if you think every death row inmate begs for forgiveness in their final moments, then Prisoner 22 will completely shatter that belief with his chilling last words. Words that left the execution chamber in utter silence. Stay tuned, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next gripping stories. Now let's begin our journey into the dark side of justice. 1. Emmanuel Antonio Littlejohn, Oklahoma. What began as a routine convenience store robbery in 1992 ended in a senseless death, and for Emmanuel Antonio Littlejohn. It was the start of a journey down death row that would last for decades. Kenneth Mears, his victim, was unaware that he would never come home after reporting for duty that day. He was killed by a single gunshot. But who actually fired it? Littlejohn battled for years to disprove that he was the shooter of the deadly bullet. The court, however, disagreed. His doom was sealed by the judicial system, witness testimony, and circumstantial evidence. On September 26, 2024, Oklahoma executed him by lethal injection. His last meal was meat pizza, Coca-Cola, and cheesecake, a simple meal. Yet, it was his final one. As the last moments arrived, there was no anger, no regret. Littlejohn simply turned to his mother, his eyes filled with emotion, and softly said, "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm okay." 2. Freddie Khalil Owens, South Carolina. The name Freddie Owens had been synonymous with violence since his youth. In 1997, during a convenience store robbery, he mercilessly killed the store clerk, but his bloodlust didn't end there. While awaiting trial, he murdered another inmate inside the prison. It came as no surprise that after 25 years, South Carolina decided to end Owens's life on September 20th, 2024, via lethal injection. For his final meal, he chose a hearty spread, a burger, fries, ribeye steak, chicken wings, strawberry soda, and apple pie. But no matter how much he ate, time was running out. Owens offered no last words before his execution. No apology, no justification, just a final glance exchanged with his attorney before closing his eyes forever. 3. Marcellus Salamansi, South Carolina. A contentious lawsuit that lasted more than 20 years. For the 198th murder of Felicia Gale, a former St. Louis Post-Dispatch writer, Marcellus Williams received a death sentence. Williams insisted on his innocence for 26 years. The court affirmed the death sentence, even though there was no DNA evidence that directly connected him to the crime. On the 24th of September, Missouri completed the execution in 2024. His last meal was a modest supper of fries and chicken wings, just like every other day in jail. His last words left on paper carried only a single message. All praise is due to Allah in every situation. Did he truly commit the crime, or did Missouri execute an innocent man? 4. Michael Dwayne Smith, Oklahoma. But 3 lives were taken by Michael Dwayne Smith, and what makes his crimes even more disturbing, 2 of them were killed by mistake. In 2001 in Oklahoma City, Smith carried out his first murder, a targeted shooting aimed at the son of a woman he believed had betrayed him. But instead of hitting his intended victim, he shot and killed the man's mother by mistake. But his rampage didn't stop. That same day, Smith killed 2 more people in separate attacks, both victims caught in the crossfire of his reckless violence. Smith was quickly arrested and sentenced to death. Yet during his years in prison, he never showed remorse. One peculiar fact about him: he followed a vegetarian diet throughout his incarceration. But on his execution day, rather than requesting a final meal, he simply ate whatever left. The leftover food he had from the prison commissary. On April 4, 2024, Oklahoma carried out his execution by lethal injection. When asked if he had any last words, Smith just shook his head and replied indifferently, "Nah, I'm good. No fear, no regret." As the lethal injection flowed into his veins, his body slowly slumped. Within minutes, Michael Dwayne Smith became just another forgotten in Oklahoma's history of executions. 5. Brian Dorsey, Missouri. On Christmas Eve 2006, while the world was immersed in the warmth of family and celebration, in Missouri a terrible crime took place inside a modest home. A desperate guy caught in a vicious cycle of debt and bad choices, Brian Dorsey transformed a happy evening into a nightmare filled with blood. In his despair, he contacted Sarah Bonney, his cousin, and asked for a loan. Nobody is aware of what was going through his head at the time. Was it a premeditated act of brutality or a spur-of-the-moment decision? Carrying a gun, he walked into Sarah and her husband's home, where the two were sleeping peacefully, unaware that their final moments were approaching. Gunshots shattered the silence of the night, claiming the lives of 2 people Dorsey once called family. The trial was swift. With undeniable evidence against him. Dorsey confessed to his actions, yet that did not spare him from the death sentence. After years of waiting on death row, on April 10, 2024, the final ruling was carried out. In his last hours, Dorsey was served a fairly generous final meal burger, fried chicken, fries, and pizza. A simple meal, but could it ease the torment of a man who had taken innocent lives? As the lethal injection flowed into his veins, Dorsey's last words were soft, yet filled with sorrow. "I am deeply sorry. I love everyone." 6. Jane Ray Mills, Alabama. Jane Ray Mills was more than a murderer. He was the embodiment of ruthless violence, of sheer inhumanity. In 2007, Mills broke into the home of an elderly couple, bringing with him a knife, a hammer, and automotive tool weapons that would turn a peaceful house into the site of a grisly massacre. This was not just a robbery. What he did next was beyond brutal. Blood splattered across the walls, muffled cries fading into the darkness. Once he had taken their money and medication, Mills fled, leaving behind 2 lifeless bodies and a scene too horrifying to forget. He fought his sentence for years, filing multiple appeals, but there was no escape. On May 30, 2024, at William C. Holman Prison in Alabama, his execution was carried out by lethal injection. His last meal was a seafood feast: shrimp, fish, oysters, fries, and stuffed crab. A meal that seemed extravagant, though no one knows whether he truly savored it. When the final moment arrived, he said nothing. No plea, no apology, just a cold, haunting silence in the face of death. 7. David R. Hosier, Missouri. A tale of passion, envy, and a plunge into unbridled anger. David R. was led by this. It's easier to kill someone. Hosier and Angela Gilpin were romantically involved in 2009. However, once she made the decision to make amends with her spouse, Hosier's feelings become unmanageable. His anguish and rage became deadly rage. Angela was discovered dead in her own house one terrible day. Even still, there was no concrete proof of DNA or fingerprints. Connecting him to the offense, his fate was sealed by circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. On June 11, 2024, Missouri carried out his execution by lethal injection. Hosier was sentenced to 3 years in prison. His last meal, Hosier chose steak, a baked potato, apple pie, milk, and orange juice. A meal fitting for a man about to step into eternity. When asked for his final words, he smiled and said, "I am the luckiest man on earth. I am going to heaven." A bizarre declaration, but perhaps in Hosier's mind, this was the only way to face death. Ramiro Felix Gonzalez, Texas. The crime of Ramiro Felix Gonzalez remains one of the most shocking cases in Texas history. In 2001, Bridget Townsend, an 18-year-old girl, was abducted, raped, and brutally murdered by Gonzalez. No one will ever know the terror she felt in her final moments. Only one undeniable truth remains. She never had a chance to escape. Gonzalez was arrested and quickly confessed to his crime. No excuses, no attempt to cover it up, just a cold, matter-of-fact admission. On June 26, 2024, his execution was carried out by lethal injection. Facing death, Gonzalez spoke his last words. "I am sorry to the victim's family. I hope you can forgive me, but can an apology ever ease the pain that has lasted more than 2 decades? Richard Norman Rodham, Jr., Oklahoma. In 1984, an unforgivable crime was committed. Richard Norman Rodham, Jr. was sentenced to death for assaulting and murdering his ex-wife's stepdaughter. The victim, a young innocent girl, was raped and viciously killed before being discarded like a piece of trash. For nearly 40 years, Rodham sat on death row, filing appeal after appeal. But in the end, justice prevailed. On June 27, 2024, Oklahoma executed Rodham by lethal injection. When asked for his final words, he simply said, "I've already said my goodbyes." A hollow statement, no remorse, no emotion. 10. Keith Edmund Gavin, Alabama. A botched robbery turned Keith Edmund Gavin into a killer. In 1998, in a moment of panic, he pulled the trigger, taking the life of an innocent delivery driver. For 26 years, Gavin fought to appeal his sentence. But in the end, there was no escaping fate. On July 18, 2024, Alabama carried out his execution by lethal injection. He refused a final meal, accepting only a serving of ice cream and a can of Mountain Dew. His last words were short, yet deeply meaningful. "I love my family." A simple statement, but one that carried the weight of a regret that came far too late. 11. Arthur Lee Burton, Texas. Arthur Lee Burton transformed a routine jog that fateful afternoon into an unthinkable, terrifying experience. The young woman who was his victim was unaware that in just a few minutes, she would be the victim of murder. No firearm, no sharp object, a simple shoelace. Something innocuous in any other situation. However, it turned into a tool of death in Burton's hands. Ignoring her frantic efforts, he held it securely around her neck until her body became slack. Burton did not dispute his crime when he was apprehended. Without ever attempting to defend himself, he faced punishment after confessing to everything. After spending years on death row, Texas executed him by lethal injection on August 7, 2024. In his final moments, there was no resistance, no pleas for mercy. Before the lethal drugs entered his system, he spoke his last words. "I hope you find peace." A simple statement, but was it enough to ease the pain of those he had left with wounds that would never heal? 12. Tabaram Dave Holmes, Texas. The crime of Tabaram Dave Holmes was not just a murder. It was violence fueled by rage and hatred. In July 1998, Honey broke into the home of Claudia Ben, his girlfriend's mother. No one knows what triggered his uncontrollable fury, but once it ignited, nothing could stop it. Claudia was brutally attacked, never given a chance to beg for her life or fight back. Her death became a grim testament to the cruelty Honey had unleashed. He spent 25 years in prison, trying every possible legal avenue to escape his sentence, but all attempts failed. On August 8, 2024, Utah carried out his execution by lethal injection. For his last meal, Honey chose a simple cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. Nothing extravagant. No sign of a man indulging in his final moments. His last words seemed directed not just at the victim's family, but also at himself. If this helps you heal, then do it. If they tell you that you can't change, don't believe them. But could true change ever happen when some things can never be undone? 13. Lauren Kensley Cole, Florida. A camping trip in the wilderness, a place meant for peace and relaxation, became the scene of a savage murder. Lauren Kensley Cole was not alone in his crime. In 1994, he and an accomplice targeted two brothers, John and Pam Edwards, intending to rob them. But the robbery quickly spiraled out of control. John was brutally beaten before Cole slit his throat, leaving behind a grisly crime scene in the remote forest. For 28 years, Cole fought to delay his fate, but no court would grant him mercy. On August 29, 2024, Florida executed him by lethal injection. His final meal, pizza, ice cream, M&Ms, and soda, was a reminder of what he once enjoyed as a free man. But this time, it was the last meal he would ever eat. When asked for his final words, his response was cold and emotionless. No, sir. No regret. 14. Ivan Cantu, Texas. The case of Ivan Cantu is one that remained shrouded in controversy for over 2 decades. In 2001, he was given the death penalty for killing his cousin James Moscata and his fiancée Amy Kitchen. Cantu never stopped proclaiming his innocence. He claimed he was framed, that critical evidence had never been brought to light. But the Texas justice system refused to listen. After more than 20 years of failed appeals, on February 28, 2024, Cantu entered the execution chamber. Unlike other inmates, he was not given the option of a last meal. Texas had long revoked this privilege after a previous inmate ordered an extravagant feast and refused. As he was strapped on the gurney, Cantu showed no fear. His eyes locked onto the victim's family's people who had waited more than 2 decades for this moment. But there were no apologies, no regret, only a final statement, firm and unwavering. I did not kill James and Amy. I do not believe this will bring you closure. As the lethal injection took effect, his breath slowed until his heart stopped. 15. Willie James Pye, Georgia. Willie James Pye was not just a murderer. He was a kidnapper, a rapist, and a cold-blooded killer. In 1993, Alicia Lignaro, Pye's ex-girlfriend, endured one of the most horrifying tragedies: abducted, assaulted, and ultimately murdered. She never had a chance to survive. Pye was arrested and tried in 1996, receiving the death penalty. But like so many others on death row, he survived for decades through appeals and legal delays. It wasn't until March 20, 2024 that justice was finally carried out. His last meal was nothing special. 2 chicken sandwiches, 2 cheeseburgers, a serving of fries, and a lemon-lime soda. But did he really taste it? Or was he simply chewing mechanically, knowing that this would be the last time he would eat? Or did he just munch in a robotic manner, aware that this would be his final meal? Plea for mercy, no resistance. His eyes stared at the ceiling, as if there was nothing left to say, nothing left to think about, and then, within minutes, his body went still, forever. 16. Travis James Mullis, Texas. This is one of the most brutal and enraging cases on this list. In 2008, Travis James Mullis stomped his own 3-month-old son to death, all because the baby wouldn't stop crying. A crime so cold and inhumane, it left even hardened prosecutors shaken. Mullis never ran from responsibility. He confessed immediately upon his arrest, yet no amount of truth-telling could save him from his fate. On September 24, 2024, Texas executed him by lethal injection. Before his death, he did not offer an explanation. He did not give an explanation. He only expressed gratitude to those who had stood by him. even in his darkest moments. I want to thank everyone who has stood by me through my best and worst moments. A statement of thanks, but not for his victim. Not a single word of apology for the innocent child whose life he had taken. 17. Kenneth Eugene Smith, Alabama. More than 3 decades of waiting in the shadows of death row, Kenneth Eugene Smith. He met his inescapable fate. Once an ordinary young man, he traded his freedom and his life for a mere $1,000, the price of taking an innocent woman's life. His victim, Elizabeth Sennett, the wife of a preacher, was brutally murdered in her own home. The 1989 trial ended with a death sentence, but Smith's legal battle was far from over. Decades of appeals, delays, and legal disputes stretched the case endlessly. But on January 25, 2024, all roads led to the same outcome. Smith became the first person in the world to be executed using nitrogen gas, a controversial method never before implemented. His final moments were heavy with an eerie stillness. Family, friends, and his attorney stood by, yet nothing could change what was about to happen. His last meal, steak, eggs, and fries, sat untouched, flavorless, in the face of looming death. Strapped to the execution gurney, a mask was placed over his face. As the nitrogen gas began to flow, his body convulsed violently, a painful process that lasted several minutes before silence took over. His last words echoed to the quiet room. There is no justice. 18. Allen Eugene Miller, a workplace shooting, 3 lives lost, and a death row inmate who spent nearly 25 years waiting for an end he believed was unjust. In 1999, Allen Eugene Miller killed 3 of his co-workers in a fit of rage. But throughout his years behind bars, he insisted he did not deserve to die. He fought, appealed, and resisted, but ultimately, his efforts were in vain. On September 26, 2024, Alabama executed him using nitrogen gas. Only the second time in history this controversial method was used, sparking heated debates over its humanness. His final meal consisted of hamburger steak, a baked potato, and fries. But in his final moments, there were no pleas, no remorse, just a cold and unwavering declaration. I didn't do anything to be here. 19. Garcia Glenn White, Texas. 3 people were killed in a blind, unrestrained anger. Garcia Glenn White stabbed Benita Edwards in 1989, and her twin children, who are 16 years old, to death. Why? After being turned down, he lost control, in a romantic sense. White battled to get his sentence overturned for 35 years, but he was never successful. October 1st, Texas executed him by lethal injection in 2024. When his last moment came, White. He delivered his final words while lowering his head. I hope you find peace and I apologize. But can decades of suffering be erased by an apology? Of course not. 20. Derek Ryan, Dearman, Alabama. A case haunted by its sheer brutality. Derek Ryan Dearman, Alabama, was killed in a car crash in the middle of the night. The case was reported to the U.S. Department of Justice. But this was no ordinary domestic dispute. He slaughtered 5 people, including a pregnant woman. He never denied his crimes. In court, he confessed to everything and refused to appeal, stating that justice needed to be served. On October 17, 2024, Alabama executed him by lethal injection. For his last meal, he requested seafood from a local restaurant. His final words were, I am sorry, and I pray that you may forgive me. I am sorry, and I pray that you not for himself, but for those he had taken away. To the victims' families, please forgive me. This is not for me. It's for you. 21. Richard Bernard Moore, South Carolina. A robbery, a gunfight, and a legal battle lasting over 2 decades. In 1999, Richard Bernard Moore did not just attempt to rob a convenience store. He got into a shootout with store clerk James Mahoney and killed him. For more than 20 years, Moore fought appeal after appeal. But in the end, South Carolina moved forward with his execution on November 1st, 2024. His final meal was a feast: steak, fried catfish, shrimp, baked potato, broccoli with cheese, sweet potato pie, German chocolate cake, and grape juice. Before closing his eyes, Moore spoke his last words: "I deeply regret the pain I caused the Mahoney family. I love my children and grandchildren. Thank you for bringing joy into my life." 22. Carrie Dale Grayson, Alabama, one of the most disturbing cases on this list. In 1994, Carrie Dale Grayson and 3 other accomplices attacked a hitchhiker, Vicky DeBlue. They savagely beat her, leaving her severely injured and dying on an Alabama hillside. But while the others escaped the death penalty because they were under 18, Grayson was sentenced to die. Merely 30 years later, Alabama decided to use nitrogen gas, a highly controversial execution method. His last meal was a Mexican feast: soft tacos, beef burritos, and a lot of other things. But when his final moment arrived, he showed no fear, no remorse. Instead, he looked straight at the witnesses and spat out one final insult: "You should go to hell." What happened next left the entire room silent. His body convulsed violently, his legs jerked uncontrollably for about 30 seconds, and his hands clenched so tightly that his hands were turning white before he lost consciousness. For only the second time in Alabama's history, nitrogen gas was used, and what followed made witnesses question whether this was truly the painless death they had been promised. 23. Christopher Leroy Collings, Missouri. There are crimes so horrific that society struggles to comprehend how a person could commit them. Christopher Leroy Collings was one of those people. In 2007, Collings kidnapped, raped, and murdered 9-year-old Rowan Ford, an innocent child who trusted him. No one can fathom the terror Rowan endured in her final hours. Physically and emotionally tormented, she had no way to escape. When it was over, Collings hid her body, desperately trying to cover up his crime, but the truth quickly surfaced. Missouri did not hesitate to hand down a death sentence. After 17 years on death row, on December 3, 2024, his execution was carried out by lethal injection. For his final meal, Collings requested a hearty plate, a bacon cheeseburger, fried mushrooms, fries, and a chef's salad. But could a last meal ever ease the pain of those who lost their daughter, their granddaughter, their loved one? When the final moment came, Collings did not resist, did not show anger, only acceptance. "I accept my fate. I ask for forgiveness, and I hope you can find a way to move forward." But can forgiveness ever come when the memory of the victim lingers forever in the hearts of those left behind? 24. Joseph Edward Corcoran, Indiana. A family tragedy, a chaotic mind, and a murder no one saw coming. In 1997, Joseph Edward Corcoran walked into a house not the home of an enemy, not the home of a stranger, but the home of his own brother, James Corcoran. No warning, no signs of an impending attack. He simply pulled out a gun and shot James and 3 of his brother's friends dead on the spot. The reason? No one could say for sure. Corcoran suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, yet he refused treatment, rejected any attempts to help him. When sentenced to life in prison, he was given a life sentence. He was sentenced to 10 years to death. He did not appeal, nor did he make any effort to save his own life. For years, debates raged on. Should a severely mentally ill person be executed? But the legal system had made its decision, and on December 18, 2024, Indiana carried out the execution by lethal injection. His final meal was not a lavish feast, not a farewell celebration, just a simple serving of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. When asked if he had any last words, his response was short, resigned. Nothing. Just do it. No plea for forgiveness. No sign of regret. Just a man who had accepted his fate long ago. 25. Kevin Ray Underwood, Oklahoma. A horrific and cold-blooded crime, driven by twisted desires even the killer himself could not fully explain. In 2006, Kevin Ray Underwood did not just kill a 10-year-old girl. He carefully planned a crime so monstrous that it shocked an entire state. Jamie Rose Ballin, an innocent child, had no idea that when Underwood lured her into his home that day, she would never walk out again. He struck her in the head with a wooden cutting board, then strangled her until she stopped breathing. When police began their investigation, he didn't try to hide it instead. He confessed everything and led them to her body. The case shook Oklahoma to its core, and the death sentence was handed down swiftly. For 18 years, Underwood waited on death row, and on December 19, 2024, Oklahoma ended his life with a lethal injection. His final meal was never disclosed, only that it was a large meal, as if he wanted to savor what little was left of his life. He was a man of his word. He was a man of his existence before being led away. When asked if he had any last words, he simply said, "I deeply regret what I have done. I wish I could go back and change everything." However, time does not go back in time. It was impossible to reverse what had been done. Additionally, Kevin Ray Underwood, he gave his life to pay for it. Thus, we've reached the conclusion of 25 of the most startling executions in the United States in 2024. Crimes that horrified the nation, last words that haunted those who heard them, and execution methods that sparked debate. But in the end, the most important thing to reflect on is not just their deaths, but the irreversible consequences of their crimes. What is the biggest lesson from these stories? No matter the motive, greed, hatred, violence, or a single moment of blind rage, every choice comes with a price. Sometimes, the ultimate price. These cases are not just tragedies for the victims, as well as the demise of the perpetrators. There is no way to have a happy conclusion when you decide to lead a criminal life. However, what about 2025? Death row in America will witness more executions still. Next up, who? Which offenses will result in punishment? And will any of them spark even greater fear? Who will be next? What crimes will be punished? And will any of them greater controversy than what we've just witnessed? Don't miss the latest criminal execution video, All Prisoners to be Executed in 2025, where we reveal the list of inmates scheduled to die next year, along with their shocking crimes, their final words, and the last moments of their lives. Click here to watch the new video now. And don't forget, like this video if you found it informative. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a crime story. Turn on notifications to be the first to witness the most chilling cases. Crime may be hidden, but justice never sleeps. See you in the next video.